1942. Papua New Guinea. The jungle was thick, suffocating, deadly. American officers stood at the base camp, staring in disbelief at the Australian soldiers marching past them. No steel helmets, just wide-brimmed felt hats. One American lieutenant turned to his sergeant and said, "Are these Aussies crazy? The Japanese have machine guns, mortars, and they're wearing cowboy hats." But what happened next changed everything those Americans thought they knew about combat. Because that cowboy hat, the Australian slouch hat, had advantages that nobody expected, advantages that saved thousands of lives. Let me tell you the real story. The year is 1915. Gallipoli, Turkey, Australian and New Zealand soldiers, the Anzacs, were fighting in one of World War I's bloodiest campaigns. The British officers looked at the Australians with frustration. "Why won't they wear proper helmets?" they complained. The Australians had been issued standard British steel helmets, the Brodie helmet, heavy, uncomfortable, hot, but the Aussies refused to wear them. Instead, they kept wearing their slouch hats, wide-brimmed, made of rabbit fur felt, with one side pinned up with the Rising Sun badge. And there was a reason, a very good reason. You see, the slouch hat wasn't just a hat, it was a carefully designed piece of military equipment. Let me explain what made it special. First, sun protection. Australian soldiers fought in some of the hottest places on Earth: North Africa, the deserts of Libya and Egypt, the Pacific jungles, New Guinea, Borneo, Vietnam. In those environments, the sun could kill you just as easily as enemy bullets. Heat stroke, dehydration, sunburn so severe it put men in hospital. The wide brim of the slouch hat provided shade for the face, neck, and shoulders. It reduced heat exhaustion by nearly 40%. According to Australian Army medical records from 1943, 40%. Steel helmets, they trapped heat. They turned your head into an oven. In the desert, wearing a steel helmet for 6 hours could raise your core body temperature to dangerous levels. But that was just the first advantage. The second advantage? Ventilation. The slouch hat allowed air to circulate. Your head stayed cooler. You could think clearer. You could fight longer. In the jungles of New Guinea, where temperatures hit 95 degrees Fahrenheit with 90% humidity, that circulation meant the difference between staying alert and collapsing from heat exhaustion. American soldiers who fought alongside Australians in the Pacific noticed this immediately. One U.S. Marine Corps report from 1943 stated, "Australian troops demonstrate superior heat tolerance in jungle operations. Their headgear appears to contribute significantly to this advantage." But here's where it gets interesting. The third advantage was something nobody expected: camouflage. Wait, how does a hat provide camouflage? Let me tell you about Sergeant Jack Morrison, the Kokoda Track, New Guinea. Morrison's Australian patrol was pinned down by Japanese machine gun fire. They were in thick jungle. Visibility was maybe 20 meters. Steel helmets would have reflected light, given away their positions instantly. But the slouch hats, dull felt, non-reflective, and soldiers could tuck vegetation into the brim. Morrison and his men pushed ferns, leaves, and branches into their hat brims. They became invisible. The Japanese fired at shadows while the Australians moved silently around their flanks. When the ambush came, it was devastating. The Japanese position was overrun in 4 minutes. Morrison later said, "The slouch hat saved our lives that day. Steel helmets would have gotten us all killed." Now, you might be thinking, but what about protection? Steel helmets stop bullets and shrapnel. True, steel helmets did provide protection against overhead shrapnel. But here's what the statistics showed. Australian Army casualty reports from World War II analyzed head wounds in the Pacific Theater. The findings were surprising. Most head wounds came from frontal fire, not overhead shrapnel. Bullets, direct shots, close-range combat, and steel helmets didn't stop rifle bullets anyway. A Japanese Arisaka rifle round would punch through a Brodie helmet like paper. So, the protection argument, it wasn't as strong as people thought. Meanwhile, the slouch hat's advantages in heat management, visibility, and camouflage were proven to save lives. Let me tell you about the Battle of El Alamein, October 1942. North Africa. The Australian 9th Division was fighting alongside British forces against Rommel's Afrika Korps. The desert sun was merciless. Temperatures exceeded 110 degrees Fahrenheit. British soldiers, wearing steel helmets, suffered massive heat casualties. Hundreds of men collapsed from heat stroke before they even engaged the enemy. The Australians, wearing their slouch hats, maintained combat effectiveness throughout the day. A British medical officer wrote in his diary, "The Australians seem immune to the heat that is dropping our chaps like flies. Their distinctive hats appear to make all the difference," General Bernard Montgomery himself noticed. After the battle, he asked Australian commanders about the slouch hat. He was told, "It's not just a hat, it's a survival tool." But the real proof came in Vietnam, 1960s and 70s. The Australian Army sent troops to fight alongside Americans in the jungles of South Vietnam. American soldiers wore the M1 steel helmet. Australians? Many still wore slouch hats on patrol. And something remarkable happened. Australian SAS soldiers, wearing slouch hats on long-range reconnaissance patrols, had a lower heat casualty rate than American units wearing steel helmets. They could patrol longer, stay alert longer, fight more effectively. A U.S. Navy SEAL named Roger Hayden spent 10 days on patrol with Australian SAS troops in 1969. He later said, "Those Aussies taught me more about jungle survival in 10 days than I learned anywhere else. And their slouch hats, I thought they were crazy at first, but they knew what they were doing." So, why did Australian soldiers refuse steel helmets? Because they understood something that others didn't. Combat effectiveness isn't just about armor. It's about staying conscious, staying alert, staying alive in extreme heat. It's about not reflecting light that gives away your position. It's about being able to camouflage yourself in any environment. The slouch hat gave them all of that. Today, the Australian Army still uses the slouch hat for ceremonial purposes. But it's more than ceremony. It's a symbol of soldiers who trusted their experience over tradition, who chose practical effectiveness over conventional thinking, who understood that sometimes the old way is the better way. And those soldiers, they fought from Gallipoli to Vietnam. They earned the respect of every army they fought alongside, not because of their helmets, but because they understood that survival in combat requires intelligence, adaptation, and the courage to be different. The slouch hat wasn't a weakness. It was an advantage that nobody expected. If you learned something new today, hit that like button. And if you want more stories about military history that challenge what you think you know, subscribe and turn on notifications. Thanks for watching.